Welcome to Finding Commonalities and Solutions with Decision Makers. Since its inception, one of the ways that Voices for Healthy Kids has supported campaigns is through message development and support. And we've conducted large national message research projects, as well as hundreds of state and local based messaging projects. And our initial work led us really to develop issue-specific tools to help advocates develop messages that swayed the public and decision makers to support our key public health priorities. In recent years, we've really increased the depth of that work. We've moved beyond simple issue-based support and have sought to increase the communication and messaging skill set of our advocates. And we are really dedicated to helping advocates across the spectrum with their messaging needs and with developing the skills they need to get those messages across. We now focus on working with advocates to meet decision makers where they are, communicating in a manner that resonates with their values. Our goal is not just to pass good public policy, but to increase communication, consensus, and relationship building. I'm Allison Frazier. I'm with the National Collaborative for Infants and Toddlers. I head up our communications, grassroots training, and resource development team, and I'm really happy to be with you today. Tara Hall is also on our team, and she will be joining us a little bit later on and can introduce herself then. So over the last few years, we have focused on value-based messaging, so learning to better understand those you seek to influence and finding a common ground to build consensus. We have focused on developing tools, trainings, and guides that help customize messages that appeal to those who have the power to give you what you want using non-polarizing communication tactics. Today's training and the full guide it reflects was really created to help people think about how to build a relationship long-term that can address issues and establish trust with those you sometimes struggle to connect with, so that we can get on the road to having more productive conversations and building a better trusting relationship with those we're hoping to influence. Today, we're going to focus on the overall learnings from the guide, and then I'm going to give you sort of all the resources you need to go deeper and to find more resources connected to it. While we'll be covering this really quickly today, I want you to know that you can find online modules with short videos for each of the sections of the guide that cover sort of all the aspects you need to know, as well as a lot of online resources and tools. And also we do customized one-on-one consulting around these issues, so we'll give you a way to reach out to us as well on that. So our work here is really grounded in the intent of building productive working relationships to advance good public policy. Not only have we a better understanding of lawmakers and messaging frames to enter the conversation, we've also really integrated, again, that non-polarizing communication lens, which prioritizes listening and understanding multiple viewpoints, and asks us to try to release assumptions. So part of that is not only learning about who you're trying to talk to, but also about yourself and how you're getting to the spot that you're in. So we all come from an array of backgrounds and beliefs, and we hope to keep an open and curious space for this to happen. It will make us not just better communicators, but better advocates as well. So I'm really excited to be here today. So today we're going to try to talk about, we'll take you through the brief introduction to our resource, which is really a guide to support advocates working on policy. We'll also and it is really focused. You look in the guide, and we did use PN3 issues. There are some things around there around preemption, but I just want to be really clear that these lessons can be applied to any policy issue that you're working on. And the lessons, I know they help me at home too when I'm talking to my spouse and my kids. So that certainly is a side benefit here. But this work really came out of a request from advocates in our network to help customize messages and policy asks, especially when working with decision makers in conservative states. The guide shares our research, our messages, and our audience strategy, but we're offering really something different too, and that we're hearing is pretty unique and urgently needed. And it's really that support for finding that common ground with decision makers who often hold differing views, and to engage in conversations in a non-polarizing and psychological safe way today. It certainly doesn't get it isn't lost on me that we're having this training on January 6th, which was really a sign of the issues that our country is having and disagreeing in a good way. And we're hoping that tools such as this can get us all to think about how we communicate better and how we can really disagree in productive ways, building on common values and finding places where we can connect. This is really about being smart in our strategy and smart in how we maintain our passion for this work and our compassion for everybody's basic humanity. It's about doing our best work while taking care of ourselves. So in this current really polarized and polarizing political atmosphere, it's easy to feel depleted or to turn against one another or to feel hopeless. We need to take good care of ourselves and our colleagues in order to prevent burnout and isolation and get the policies passed that we want to see passed. I've worked with some of you for years and others for just a short time. I see a lot of hearts on the screen, and I see you. We see you. We see the power and the weight of the work that you're doing, and we hope this resource is helpful to you. Our work is only just beginning in this area. As capacity and funding allows, we hope to be adding to this library of offerings. We certainly pick our projects based on real-world requests of advocates. So please dive in with us, and if there's something else that you would need help with, please ask and let us know, and we're happy to try to deliver that for you. Before we share the details, I want to reinforce our commitment to do this work without stereotypes or judgment, and instead to focus on understanding the feeling, needs, and core values within each group that we're trying to talk to. I know lots of you come to this training because you want to hear this is built on archetypes, and people want to get to like, what are the archetypes? What are they? What are they? And we're going to get there for you, but we just want to be really clear with our definitions. So the definition of an archetype is a very typical example of a certain person or thing. The definition of a stereotype, on the other hand, is a widely held but fixed and oversimplified image or idea of a particular type of person or thing. Where stereotypes can reduce people to a simplistic idea, really shutting down curiosity and openness, archetypes give us examples of people who may hold similar views and values in order to increase that understanding. So you can use the archetypes as part of your analysis of a decision maker, helping you and your coalition determine who you will meet with and who the right people to attend those meetings are and what information you'll share. Of course, you'll want to add on your own homework. Your specifics is vital when you're preparing for meeting with a lawmaker, but let's dive more into the archetypes themselves. So the archetypes, this research and the resources focus specifically on conversations with decisions in conservative states or conservative areas where advocates were feeling the most opposition to our PN3 policies. Eventually, we hope to expand this research to strengthen conversations with all decision makers. Our first goal, again, was to deeply understand this group of decision makers and specifically the values and needs that inform their policy work. Because there's no one conservative decision maker, we developed and built out 4 archetypes, which are typical examples of the person or group. Those archetypes enable us to explore more specific ways of approaching PN3 policy conversations. There's details in the guide about our methodology, but briefly, we started with existing research on archetypes. We workshopped those archetypes with key influencers representing both conservative, progressive viewpoints and party affiliations, and with advocates working on PN3 issues in conservative areas. So the 4 archetypes we defined are church and country, economic influenced, legacy Republicans, and populist aligned. We then identified decision makers and policy influencers who fall into each of those archetypes based on the descriptions we created and informed by suggestions from previous interviewees and advocates. We then narrowed that list to 3 or 6 within each archetype and interviewed those decision makers in a really thorough way. We also then looked at social media posts by decision makers within each archetype. And our commitment, again, was to do this without stereotypes or judgment, instead to focus on what the feelings were, what the needs were, what the core values were within each archetype to help us advance productive debate. And now I'm really excited to turn it over to Tara, who's going to more deeply dive into each of the archetypes. And again, you'll find all the detail in the online guide. Tara.
Hello, everybody. I'm Tara Hall. I'm the Senior Marketing Communications Manager for Voices for Healthy Kids, which, as you know, helps power the National Collaborative for Infants and Toddlers. And so we're going to dive into each of these archetypes and give you some really solid examples of some of their values and things that might make them go, aha, when you go to talk to them. So we're going to walk through each of the 4 archetypes shortly, but before we dive into those explanations, you're going to first hear from a decision maker or a person in power whose words align with each archetype. And this is going to offer you a real-world example of these ideologies and how they show up in practice. So let's play the first video, Church and Country.
I would say that I grew up, again, in a generation where even if people had very deep personal faith, they didn't talk about their faith a whole lot. And I grew up in a country where you just didn't hear political leaders talk about their faith, but the reason why I try to be the best husband I can be, the best father I can be. The reason why I care so much about all the issues that we're going to talk about is because I believe that I've been placed in this position for a brief period of time to do the most amount of good for God and for the country that I love so much. And that's the most important way that my faith influences me, is we all get a limited opportunity to make a difference. And if you believe as we believe, you believe that God, you believe that Jesus Christ has a plan. And sometimes we don't understand that plan. By the way, one way I don't understand that plan is why my friend lost his life 6 weeks ago. Sometimes I get pissed off about that. But what I remind myself is that there is a deeper rhythm, that Jesus Christ is the author of the fate of human history, and we are charged to do everything that we can to effectuate that vision, to make our country a more virtuous place, a more prosperous place where people can raise a family and not be persecuted for their faith, but teach their children their faith. That recognition that all of us have a duty. And I have two very important duties as Vice President of the United States, to the American people and to God, and that's the most important influence my faith has on me.
All right, so if it wasn't clear, that was Church and Country. And so this group, if we go to the next slide, you're going to see this group is deeply loyal to the leaders they choose, and they're guided by conservative interpretations of Christian values. For them, faith isn't just personal, it is a moral compass that shapes how they view responsibility, leadership, and community life. And many of them feel called by their faith to serve and protect others, and that might look different depending on who you're talking to. So they could look at that as their family, their congregation, or the broader community. They often see churches, families, and local networks as the first and best line of support, believing these institutions already have the tools to help people in need. There's a strong pride in earned position and hard work, paired with an expectation that others should strive for self-sufficiency, while at the same time, there's genuine compassion for people who are facing hardship, particularly in some rural communities, which I'm sure you guys are seeing firsthand. And when challenges are seen as unavoidable rather than the result of personal choices. Take a look at these core values. This is what's really going to resonate with this group of people: faith, authority, tradition, control, and care for others. So now we're going to go on to our next archetype. This is the economic influence archetype. So let's give a listen to what this sounds like to folks who you might be talking to in some decision-making roles.
So as a business guy, what always frustrated me was just the regulatory environment, the permitting environment of all government, local, state, and federal. So first off, what Alon and Vivek are going to do is basically what I did when I became governor of Florida. I reduced the regulatory environment. That actually is going to have a bigger impact on job creation, business success, things like that, than anything else we do. Taxes are important, fees are important, but actually the cost of the regulations. Just in Biden's 4 years, the cost of federal regulation has gone up by something like $2.6 trillion. We only have a $28 trillion economy. So number one is we're going to reduce the regulatory environment. We're going to make it easier to get permits. That's going to have a pretty big impact on our economy. Number two is we've had a 2% increase in our population in the last 5 years and a 53% increase in spending. That's not Medicare. That's not Social Security. That's just wasteful government spending. Everything under the sun got spent the last 4 years. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to go through each department like you do in a business. Like I did when I was governor. There's 4,000 lines of the budget in Florida. I went through every line and say, could we do this less expensively? And we're going to find ways to do that. We're not going to cut Medicare benefits. We're not going to cut Social Security. We might figure out a way to provide health care at a more efficient way and less cost. It shouldn't cost what it costs. I used to be in that business. It should never cost what it costs in this country. But I'm excited. We're going to see reduced regulation, easier permitting, and we're going to reduce the deficit. My goal, of course, is always to balance the budget. I did it as governor of Florida. We can do it federally, but we've got to work at it.
All right, so let's go to that next slide where it's going to break down what our economic influence decision makers might be thinking. So this group is typically highly educated and financially secure with a strong focus on economic growth and business stability. They value efficiency, innovation, and outcomes, and they tend to approach policy decisions through a practical and analytical lens. Decision makers in this group, they want to see numbers. They want to see hard facts. They're drawn to detailed discussion about costs, benefits, return on investment. And they're going to often evaluate policy through this question. Number one, does it work? And number two, is it worth it? They generally favor limited government, believing the public sector alone is often inefficient, and that solutions are strongest when they're leveraged with the private sector, families, and markets. The government's role, in their view, should be to remove barriers, not create them. When you're trying to come up with messaging to speak to this group of folks, your messaging is going to be most efficient when it shows how policies expand choice, how those policies increase flexibility, and how they give families greater control over their own decisions rather than prescribing a one-size-fits-all solution. So some of the core values that are going to resonate with this group of people is freedom, individual choice, and control. So let's go ahead and listen to our next soundbite, where we're going to hear a little bit about legacy Republicans and what they stand for.
You know, as we think about the challenges of the world and the extreme poverty and the extreme diseases of the world, I think it's important to understand that perhaps the best ally that peace and prosperity and wellness have ever had is a strong America. And in my first year as president, I'm going to be focusing on making America stronger. We face some extraordinary challenges. Global jihad that attacked us on 9/11 and that is seeking to obtain nuclear weaponry in the hands of Iran, for instance. We're also seeing challenges economically coming from China and India. And we have our own domestic problems. We have schools that are failing a lot of our kids, falling well behind international standards. Healthcare, insurance eludes some 47 million Americans. So my first priority in my first year is strengthening America. Now, of course, we're part of a world that has people suffering and that has challenges. We have humanitarian concerns. We want to see the world also become a stronger place. And we'll work with our friends and neighbors around the world to see how we can alleviate poverty, reduce disease, and strengthen the underpinnings, if you will, the foundations that would lead to liberal democracies blooming across the world. I've called, for instance, for a Summit of Nations to bring together our friends and other free nations to talk about how we could support moderate Muslim states that are enduring the attack of violent jihad, and then helping build more schools, health clinics, and some of the foundational elements that can strengthen those nations. So we'll work on a global basis. We'll work with other nations to encourage the development of agricultural, economic, educational, and health policies that can encourage the improvement of living conditions for people around the globe. But again, first priority, get America on the right track, because we're off the right track. We are weakening as a nation. We need to become stronger. And I want to fight for a strong and capable military to protect us, a strong economy to provide good jobs for our citizens and young people coming along, and strong families and values. These elements of strengthening America, I think, will enable us long term to be able to be the greatest support to the entire human family.
All right, and if we go to the next slide, you can see that decision makers in the legacy Republican archetype are guided by traditional values rooted in hard work, personal responsibility, and the promise of the American dream. This group values thoughtful debate, and they're generally interested in hearing different perspectives. While they might identify with strongly Republican principles, they're often willing to step outside of party lines when presented with well-reasoned arguments grounded in shared values and practical outcomes. When you're trying to shape that messaging on how to talk to this group of people, you really need to acknowledge service, responsibility, and long-term impact. Those are going to be the themes that resonate most. And some of the core values that we are going to be thinking about when we talk about those legacy Republicans are diligence, care for others, service, and leadership. Now we're going to dive into that final archetype. This is the populist aligned archetype. So let's give a listen on what this sounds like, and then we'll dive a bit deeper when we get back.
And that's one reason why I'm pro-Trump and I'm a conservative, is because I truly believe in the individualistic approach to the problems that we see within the black community or in America as a whole. You can think about it, Black Wall Street, Harlem Renaissance, all that time, we was doing great. But when the policies came in and started destroying the black community slowly and slowly, matter of fact, it was supposed to get rid of poverty or at least lessen it, but we have more poverty now than we had back then.
All right, so decision makers in the populist aligned archetype place a high value on individual effort. You heard that in that soundbite there. personal responsibility and self-reliance. They believe people should be able to advance through hard work without heavy reliance on government programs or public spending. This group is strongly guided by constitutional principles and a loyalty to American ideals, often emphasizing freedom, fairness as they define it, and limited government intervention. Now, it is important to note that populist aligned does not simply mean populists. While populists are often working class, populist aligned leaders are typically decision makers who intentionally appeal to populist values, even if they don't share the same background. Now, they're going to respond best to messages that emphasize earned opportunity, accountability, and fairness rooted in effort rather than redistribution. And so some of the core values that are going to resonate most strongly are loyalty to America, diligence, and freedom. Now, of course, even with more detailed look at conservative decision makers, it's important to remember that no one is going to fit neatly in a little box. No one is going to be a single archetype. Oftentimes, the values are going to overlap, priorities will shift, and individuals will often draw from multiple frameworks all at once. And we're going to see that, you're going to see that with independent lawmakers or Democratic lawmakers. They might actually fall in some of these categories as well. So you're going to have to tailor those messages depending on who you're talking to. And you can do a little bit of digging, a little bit of research to really find out what the decision maker you're speaking to, where their values are the strongest, so you can tailor those messages. Because of all of these things that I've just discussed, the guide, which we're going to share afterwards, is going to highlight insights that tend to hold true across all of these archetypes, including freedom as a powerful unifying value, a deeply held belief in individual responsibility, particularly when it comes to caring for yourself and your family, and then a strong perception among conservatives that they're often judged or villainized by progressive advocates. And that's a dynamic we really want to avoid because it can quickly shut down dialogue before it even begins. So we want to make sure that we are approaching these conversations with respect, with curiosity, and with common ground, rather than having assumptions or preconceived notions before you're going into the conversation. So you might be asking yourself, okay, so now I understand what the archetypes are, but I'm not exactly sure how to get from my messaging to messaging that is going to resonate with someone who falls within one of these four archetypes. And so what I did is I used an AI chatbot just for a little bit of assistance. And I typed into the AI chatbot each of the archetypes as well as a definition of what they stand for. And I created a single argument, something like, the Family Medical Leave Act keeps your job safe. Paid family medical leave keeps your paycheck safe. In a strong and caring community, no one should have to choose between love and livelihood. Now, how can we take that message and make it appeal to someone who's church and country, economically influenced, legacy Republican, or populist aligned? And so I used a little help with the AI chatbot. I'm going to paste this into the chat so that way you can take a look at it and you can see how it is a common message, but it's been tailored for each individual archetype. And I'm pasting it here because hopefully when you are doing this type of work on your own, you can use this as an example of how you can take a single message and hopefully help it resonate with a wide variety of lawmakers, decision makers, whoever you're going to be speaking with. And so with that, Allison, I'm going to pass it back to you, and I'm going to paste this in the chat for everyone. If you find it beneficial, please feel free to use it in your work.
Thanks so much, Tara. And I think that, I loved how you talked about not villainizing the other person. And I'll get a little bit into dials in a second, but I think about when I used to lobby directly all the time. And there were some offices that I would stand outside of that office and get myself all ramped up before I went in because I knew they were going to disagree with me. And so I didn't walk in wanting to listen to that person. I walked in already deciding what my arguments were going to be back to them. So obviously that is not a place to start a good relationship. So that's an example of and I can still do that some days with my husband, let's be honest. So there are ways that we can think about using this in a way that you really want to listen. And I did see a question in the chat box about defining freedom. And I think that's part of the question was, how does I'd like a deeper understanding of how each archetype defines freedom, and that I see freedom as a value, but they might not define it the same way I do. That's absolutely true. But are we listening to how they're discussing freedom? Are we asking them to explain to us what they mean by freedom? Those are the things you do when you're curious and you're interested, and you're not just trying to build an argument to fight against them. So that's just one thought there. But we can go to the next slide now. And so we just want to say, like, the guide also gives you dials, and that's ways to get more specific in each archetype. You can think of it of ways to turn up or down characteristics within that archetype based on things like their age or where they live, their lived experience. Are they a parent themselves or other factors? Like, there have been times that I have talked very in depth with, say, a member of the church and country who feels very strongly that a family is one mother and one father, and the mother stays at home to care, and then had a grandchild, and maybe their child and their spouse couldn't afford for that mother to stay home anymore. And that sort of, it was typically they would be very strong about the mother staying home and not working, but having an experience of having a grandchild and knowing what childcare cost, that is different. So that's a dial that would change for that individual person. And I want to acknowledge that we really explored ways to more directly address the need for policies that make up for past harm done by policy, which I know is important to a lot of us. And it might not surprise you to hear that that can be counterproductive to begin a conversation. And I know that's not a surprise to you, but I also know that it might not be that may cause you some harm. That may not be where you want to start a conversation. It may not seem really connected to your own values in many ways. And I just want to really emphasize that this is about building understanding and changing culture in a longer term effort. It's incrementally through open listening and trust building a relationship with somebody else so that you can help influence them. For those of you who are in a setting where it's possible to advance more direct conversations about the systems and history and the impact of policies, we encourage you to do so. We're happy to help you figure that out. For those of you who are in a place and with an organization and are in a place in their heart where they want to speak truth to power in any setting, in every setting, regardless of who you're talking to, we support you in that. For those of you who are in a place that needs to build more safety and trust to get there, we hope this guide can help you get there and build those relationships long term. So really, that's another good pivot point for us to start to talk about another essential component of this guide, and it's really applying non-polarizing communications to supporting your needs. Next slide. And applying this project is really different, as I said, from many other messaging guides because it incorporates that non-polarizing approach. We worked with a non-polarizing communications expert who had worked really around the world in big conflict areas to find a way to approach finding common ground during challenging conversations while also taking care of yourself and your team members. And a really effective way to find common ground, even when two people seem worlds apart, is really to connect on that level of common humanity. And this really means not focusing on opposing strategies. We focus instead on hearing and identifying the feeling, needs, and core values that that other person is expressing. This is really a new way of listening. It's not me outside that lawmaker's office. It's really a new way of listening that allows us to understand the underlying motivators and not get stuck in a specific strategies right away. We're not saying, this is a problem, this is the answer. You're really thinking about, how is this perfect talking about our community and what we need to change? Where are their common core values and needs and feelings around this issue? And where do they line up with mine so we can find a place to start this conversation? It's shocking to me, even though I do this training a lot, is there's only 20 core needs that all humans seek to fill. And if we think about these needs and the values and feelings associated with them, we can really better understand ourselves and those we hope to connect with. So in the question around freedom, if someone's talking about freedom, I'm really asking them, what does that mean to you? What does freedom look like on a day-to-day basis for you? How do you think that freedom of our families or people that are trying to succeed in our country, how do you think freedom impacts them? Those are the kind of questions that can maybe start a conversation, and you might find places that you can connect. So there may be part of you that wants to find common ground. And just to be really open, there might be parts of you that really feel frustrated and angry because you can't feel like you can't bring up the things you're passionate about, or you don't think there's going to be common ground. I just want to emphasize that non-polarizing means, rather than falling into them versus us, where it's me versus you, where there's a winner and there's a loser, we really speak and listen from a place of curiosity, because we want to understand where we can make a bridge between our core values and those of another person whose stance may on the face look really, really different from ours. And it means staying connected to our own feelings, needs, and core values throughout the process, so we can see where they're coming up for us and we can think about them and address them in the proper way. And the guide outlines several ways for you to practice staying open and curious and finding common ground without surrendering what you hold most dear. So when we think about this, we're wired to use really 3 different types of perception. And all together, when we do this, our inner compass gets activated and keeps us aligned with our values and purpose. When we don't activate this inner compass by checking in with our feelings and our needs and our values, we can feel stuck and get hopeless. And it can really lead to those non-productive conversations where we're both just saying our points back and forth and not listening. And this really comes from that practice of non-polarizing communication. And it can feel new and it can feel strange, but people we've workshopped this with are telling us it's very helpful and resonates with the needs they have in their work. So again, non-polarizing means not falling into them versus us, but speaking and listening from curiosity, because we want to understand where we can make a bridge between our two, between our core values and those of another person. And by knowing this isn't enough, we need to be able to put it into practice, right? And practice is the key word here. You can't just learn about this and be like, oh yeah, I'll do that now. It takes practice, and it's following a simple method, and practicing this method, we can all improve on our communication and build stronger relationships. And that's what we talk about, the hidden feeling exercise. And if you come to one of our follow-up trainings, or you come to one of our larger trainings, or you watch some of our modules online, we really get into this hidden feeling exercise. I'm going to talk a little bit about it. And it's really a simple method for regaining clarity and composure and using non-polarizing language to build those bridges and self-care. So you can stay fully present and be at your best. So it's about trying it over and over and over again so that you get better at it and you can do it more naturally, and it becomes part of your toolbox when you're making connections with people. So the 4 simple steps are: you learn to replace blaming language with feeling words. So you learn to apply that idea in conversations with decision makers. You practice translating statements from decision makers into feeling, needs, and value statements. And then you role play to prepare for the conversations. If you know that you're going in to meet with somebody who is church and country, you may, hear things like a quote that we have from a church and country lawmaker was, "Life is not fair. Life is hard. I'm bound by my faith and my obligation to my fellow man, but I don't want the government dictating a redistribution of resources." That's the basis of Marxism. That does not work. So a state representative, 48 years old, who lived in a suburban area, said this. And so we could see from that we could look at and compare it to the archetypes and see that that person was church and country. What were we hearing in his needs and values and statements and feelings in that? It was really about freedom. It was about safety. There was faith in there. There was the need for hard work, service, and there was some fear. You could hear that. So a possible translation was like, yeah, I respect that people, right. You respect that people go through hard times, and you're a man of faith, and you believe that offering support is the right thing to do, but not taking away anyone else's freedom. What does that mean to you? What does support look like for you? So it's not saying like, oh, I disagree right away. It's saying, I hear what you're saying. This is what I think you're saying. Is that true? And can you explain it a little bit more to me? So that's sort of the basics of the conversation today. I'm going to go through now sort of some of the resources that we have, and we do have some time for some questions. But before we move on, I've got a couple things to plug. The first is the National Collaborative for Infants and Toddlers. We are really a group of over 500 organizations around the country that are building a movement together that will provide those policies that every child needs and their families need to thrive, to make every infant, toddler, and expectant parent as healthy and as supported as possible. So if your organization isn't already a member, I encourage you to join as a member. You certainly always get resources like this. You can go on our website, get all our resources. You can come to trainings. But if you're a member, you get a different level of service and you get to access some additional supports that we think are really helpful. So we'd love to see you become a member. You can find out all the information at the QR code, and the link will be in the chat and in the follow-up materials. And now I'm going to go over sort of the full set of resources that we have for this. But before I do that, because I know a lot of people jump off before questions or after we give you sort of the links, I just want you to not jump off right away. So after the slide and after we do some questions, there'll be a short survey that pops up on the screen. We take your feedback incredibly seriously. We ask you to fill that out so we can get better at this and make sure we're getting the things that you need into your hands. So that is just my couple plugs there. But so I want you to check out our full resources on the Voices for Healthy Kids website. There you'll find the full online guide. So there's like a PDF version of it, or you can go through the pages on the website and read through the full guide. There's a full training. So we do not just this, almost an hour intro, but there's 9 modules that you can watch that are each section of this resource is broken down. So you get an online training video. They're usually between 5 and 10 minutes, and then some materials within the guide that you can review, as well as activities and practices like the Uncovering Hidden Feelings exercise. There's communities of practice. So if you're in certain states doing this work, or you work on certain policy issues, we bring those groups together. They talk, they discuss. This is part of the things that we bring to the table there. For instance, there is a community of practice in some of our frontier states. Sorry, I'm having a word bubble there. Frontier states. And we have gone through each of the archetypes in detail on one call from them each month so that they have a better understanding, that they're able to practice it a little bit, that they're able to think about it. So we have those communities set up. If you're interested in joining some, we can certainly let you know the ones that we have. We also have no cost consultation from the Voices for Healthy Kids staff. There's a link, but we're really interested in supporting your advocacy campaign in a variety of ways to help you make sure that you're planning and executing in the best possible way. This tool is one of those things that we can do. So you don't have to have all the answers or all the questions before you fill out a request for consultation. It's just a place to start a conversation about what we could do to help you. So that's the idea on the full resources. We do these sort of trainings on these webinars. We'll do more throughout the year. We'll hopefully get into more specifics along the way. But if you have a group that's coming together, you would like to be trained, we're certainly open to that as well. We do them both in person when possible, and there's funding available, as well as by webinar a lot. So we hope we hear from some of you about those opportunities. And so I just encourage you to follow us on social media. These links are here. They'll be in the follow-up materials, but that's a way to know when new resources come out. We're out there looking for funding right now to update this guide, to potentially add new archetypes, both for conservative lawmakers, but as well as progressive. And these are the ways that you would find out that those things are available to you. So we encourage you to follow us on social media. And now questions or comments, feel free to put them in the chat box or come off mute and ask them out loud.
Hey, Allison, we had a couple questions while you
Great.
were presenting. So one is, can you address the prevalence of misinformation associated with so many topics across the spectrum of policy issues and how that impacts engagement with each archetype?
Yeah, so this is a really, really challenging one. And I think there's no one answer that's going to address it for everybody, right? So there's a couple ways that I have found really convenient and helpful for addressing this. It's two things. One, in the guide, you will see the kind of data and where people get their information by archetype. So if you're using data from the trusted sources, that's a place to start breaking down some of the misinformation, right? It's a start. The second really important thing, I think, is finding out who in their local community their trusted resource is and making sure that that person is with you, right? I may not be, I'm not the right person necessarily to be the lead on a meeting with Church and Country. I don't speak the same language in many ways that that person does. But if I brought a member of the clergy from their district, or I brought somebody that they knew who was church and country from their district, who can use their own language, their own knows their the values of that decision making better, they can have a more honest and open conversation that I can learn from and get involved in and support. But thinking about who can be the lead and where you're pulling your data from can be really helpful. If you're going to meet with somebody who's, really economically aligned, you may want to get your information from the chamber or some resources, and not necessarily from a super progressive organization that they may immediately be like, I don't trust that. So thinking about how you're framing, where you're getting your information from, and where the data is coming from when you sit down with people. But it's an issue that I can't solve easily. So I wish I had a quicker answer for you.
And one more, Allison. Christina Gonzalez says, I'd like a deeper understanding of how each archetype defines freedom. I see freedom as a value across the board, but I'm not sure that my definition of freedom is what each of these archetypes might be focused on. And then Renee agreed, saying, I also really like this question. I feel like it's more about where they find freedom to be the most important and leaning into that specific type of freedom in conversation. So I don't know if you can expound on that.
Yeah, Renee, I think that's a really smart reply. And I do think, and it's about asking questions. We often use really big words, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum. We all like our words that we go to, right? And freedom is one of those words for many people, but really asking them, how do you define freedom? Where is where do you think the biggest threat to freedom is? How do we make sure that everyone in our community has the access to that definition of freedom? It's really digging in and listening and getting beyond sort of the big buzzword and finding out how they're actually defining it and which other core values that's attached to, so that you can find where they may overlap. Are there others in there, Tara?
I don't see any other questions, but someone did bring up a good point. One thing that should be considered, the fact that many who agree with these common ground values are very aware of the isolation that can follow, including in their personal life. And someone commented, I would love to hear more about your comment. So I don't know if Anthony Queen, if you feel comfortable, I don't want to put you on the spot, but it sounds like there was a little bit of a discussion going on in the chat. I don't know if maybe you guys want to bring that online to flesh that out a little bit more.
Yeah, this is Anthony Queen. I can speak about that a little bit. The one thing I noticed was if they didn't stay, were people who agreed with some of the things that we wanted to initiate, if they didn't agree lockstep with the other side or the side that they're previously associated with, it had to be lockstep. And if you didn't do lockstep, and if you like, oh, well, I like, this idea, but I maybe didn't like this idea. But to them, they were labeled or could be labeled a traitor. And to be labeled a traitor is to be a form of isolation. And they would be like, after 10, 15 years in the organization, you make these, business connections and personal connections, and to have that all go away because you just agreed with something or disagreed with something else, they had to take that in consideration. That was one of the things, like, I was speaking to people in Texas and Maine and different areas, and it was all the same. They felt like if I don't agree lockstep with this way of thinking, then all of a sudden I'm a traitor. And all of a sudden, even on Sundays, they didn't get invited, or they got certain looks when they walked into the place that they, worship. And it's all tied in together, and that's what keeps them in lockstep. And it was one of the things that I never thought about until I kept hearing it over and over again. I've been having these kind of conversations for like the last 2-3 years. Real quick, I was on the flight back from Denver, and these one people, we were just talking and talking. Then when we got on the plane, I noticed that they were watching, a lot of Fox News, and they said they didn't watch it now because they still agree with it, but they watched it because if they didn't know what was going on, they would be labeled a certain way. And if you're older, you don't want to have to go through all that again. You've already made all those connections. So one of the way that they said that they keep in line is to have them lockstep, and that's one of the things I was talking about.
I think that's a really interesting point, and I do, and I don't know if I certainly don't have a solution for it, but what I would say is on the watching news across the spectrum, I will say one of the ways that I try to prevent myself from being in the echo chamber that is so common now, whether you're on social media or even, you're when I see my algorithm on Netflix, right? I watch a lot of British historical dramas, and I know that because every time I turn on Netflix, that's what I see. But and so my news is being filtered that same way. So thinking about, I make sure that I follow people from across the spectrum, people that I don't think I have anything in common with, people that I think are copies of me. And I think that's really important, so that you're hearing, not necessarily so you can speak the language so they think you agree with them, which some people are doing, but just so you understand where people are getting their news, what other people are hearing, what the spin is. And so just to take that one step further, is when we look for the videos of these, it's really hard to find just standalone videos sometimes of the archetypes, because you often have, it's on one network or another, and they're translated in a way that right away you can say like they're judging it in one way or the other. And so like that, even doing that is a really good lesson for me. And it's a reminder to me to go back and do it over and over again, so that I can hear how people are being described by others. A little bit off from exactly what you're talking about, but I think really you had really interesting points, and I appreciate that.
One more question before we close it out, unless others want to come on, and you can come off mute and ask your questions. But some of these strategies reinforce negative narratives, such as linking cost analysis with policies, which commodifies benefits or services in a way that may not be helpful in the long run. How would you suggest helping lawmakers understand different viewpoints?
I think Karen, this is an incredibly astute thing to talk about and to look at. And I am really hoping that we can do that next round of research on this. And what we are hearing really now is that even economic influenced, yes, they want to know that detail, but you don't necessarily have to lead with that. They care about kids too. And they care about babies too, because they care about babies, right? So making sure that, and that's where the dials come in again. It's not all economic. It's not all just detail, but you're starting with listening to them, finding out why they care about kids, why they care about babies, why they care about community, and including that within what you're talking about. So it's not all ROI. That may be, where they make decisions when it comes down to how they're voting, but they also want to be acknowledged as caring people who care about their community, who are in office because they care about their community, right? So we don't often give people that sort of, we don't often say like, thank you. Thank you for running for office and for doing this. I understand that you also care about kids, and that's why you're here. We may disagree on some of the policies, but I appreciate that in you. And I'd like to talk about this. And it has some good ROI. Like, I think that we're going to be finding that more and more, because people don't, when I go back, so we can listen, I was there, I listened to lots of the interviews I had with elected officials, and over ago, they were saying like, I feel like the bad guy. When a progressive advocate walks in here, they're already thinking that I don't care about community and I'm the bad guy. And that feels awful, right? Regardless of where you are on the spectrum. So making sure we're not doing that, I think, is part of that. And it's about just centering ourselves in, we're here for kids. And I would say like, yeah, that doesn't speak to everybody, but does speak to those, that 80% in the middle. Maybe not the 10 at the top and the 10 at the bottom, but the 8 in the middle, that's where you want to hit.
Yeah. Allison, thank you.
Sure.
And Tara, we do have a hand raised from Christina.
Hi, I had a question regarding like some of the issues where some communities have felt targeted or are targeted, because it's, like in some of the topics, I think it's easier to build bridges, but how do we also work in building bridges when maybe some of the conversations are so closed off? One of the examples I would give is immigration. Like, it's really hard because then some of the examples that were given for the archetypes, even like just like the focus on building a stronger America first, and sort of like the narrative, how do we work around that narrative to also build a bridge when we work with very specific communities that are like a target, right? And it's not just like a narrative, but we see it like in a material way. So I'm just like, I'm feeling stuck to manage that conversation, even though there's space to build bridges. It feels like the space is closed to some of these topics.
Yeah, Christina, I hear you and I feel that in my heart as well. And I think um, some of it comes back to, and there are some tools in the guide that talk about safety, because I think some of this really isn't just, it's when we're talking about safety, we're talking about, not just psychological safety, but like physical safety. Will I be safe? Will the people I love be safe? And that is real, and needs to be thought about in any sort of conversation that many people are having right now. And I understand that. We've recently had the conversation about, like, we like to share stories. It makes an issue understandable to people, but we've talked really internally about, like, should we just be using first names? Because like sharing somebody's story is also putting, at times, could put them in jeopardy if we're talking about SNAP benefits or we're talking about immigration or we're talking about other things. Now, we haven't specifically used this guide on immigration issues, but what I would think, again, are some of the major points is thinking about finding some details about that person, their history, the status of the places their family has come from, and how that may influence them or not. Or are there people that are closer to immigration on those committees that you need to influence that others, or things that I might think about? Who you're bringing with you? Again, I think clergy are really strong here. Again, I have seen really, really great meetings happen with advocates within the law enforcement community that you can connect with. So I think there are ways to do it when you think about really listening and getting to what their definition of immigration is, and if there's anywhere to connect there. Thinking about who's having the conversation and who should be in the room and who's not safe to be in the room, I think is a real conversation. And no easy answer there. And I think, yes, some of those doors are closed right now. And I'm hoping what we can do is build relationships around those most closed doors that maybe longer term they can be open as well. But it's a process. I don't have a quick answer for you. I hate that all my answers end with, I don't have a quick answer for you. But I think that's the reality.
That's okay. Thank you.
All right, I don't see any other hands. If you have questions, please email it to them. Continue to put them in the chat. I don't know, Andrea, if you can put the survey up again just for the last few minutes. We give people a few minutes in the end of our calls to fill it out. But really appreciate you being here. Happy 2026 to everybody. Thank you to my co-presenter, Tara, and Andrea, who's been running tech in the background. And we hope to hear from you all soon. Thank you.